Esta es una edición especial de White Paper y Proyecto 1954 de la US Mexico Foundation. Desde Washington, D.C., reunimos a voces clave del North Capital Meridian Diplomacy Forum, donde se discute el rumbo de la relación comercial, política y estratégica entre México, Estados Unidos y Canadá. Así que hicimos esta alianza porque creemos que estas conversaciones pueden ser de mucha relevancia para nuestra comunidad empresarial. En esta serie semanal te presentaremos 8 pláticas que tuvimos entre Enrique Perret, Emilio Cadena y yo, con diferentes invitados e invitadas de distintas industrias. Esperamos tus comentarios. Este episodio es presentado por Van Coppel.
Hello everyone, I'm Susana Sáenz and I'm really excited to be here in this special edition of the podcast White Paper with US Mexico Foundation. We have this spectacular view in Washington, D.C., where the North Capital Meridian Diplomacy Forum takes place. Today, I am joined by Enrique Perret, Managing Director of the US Mexico Foundation and President and Founder of North Capital Forum. Thank you, Enrique, for being here, for inviting us.
No, thank you for being here in Washington. I think it's a very particular moment of the relationship, and having White Paper here is amazing.
Thank you so much, and we know that this forum it's very important for the future of the economic, political, strategic future of Mexico, US, and Canada. So today we're going to talk with Patrick Lozada, Senior Director of Global Policy at the National Electrical Manufacturers Association. Welcome, Patrick. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me here.
Well, to start, I don't know, Enrique, if you agree with me, but we know that Mexico and Canada buy over 1/3 of the U.S. manufactured exports. How critical is the integration for the electrical manufacturing sector? For those unfamiliar with the National Electrical Manufacturers Association, let me tell you that it represents companies that produce essential power and electrification equipment, such as companies, I don't know, Siemens, Schneider Electric, and some others. So what can you tell us about this?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me tell you a little bit more about NEMA, and then I'll talk about that North American integration component. Okay. So we have more than 300 manufacturers of electrical equipment, all of whom manufacture in the United States. And by the way, that includes Canadian and Mexican companies who manufacture here. Mm-hmm. North American integration is essential to our industry. As you mentioned, almost 1/3 of our exports go to Mexico. Overall, 40% of our exports go to either Mexico or Canada. So North America is essential to us. And Mexico is our number one source of imports. When you look at what that integration looks like, there are several layers to it. One of which is this North American manufacturing, right? There are products that may be, the inputs are extracted in one country, they're processed in another, and then they're manufactured in stages across the other countries. So a product may cross several borders and be transformed many times before it reaches its customer, whether that's a utility or an American family who has an appliance or another object in their home. In terms of what that looks like in other aspects, NEMA also plays an important role in standardizing electrical interfaces across all 3 countries. So there's a reason why you don't have to change your plug out, right, when you go to Mexico or Canada. And that's because of work that NEMA has done with our partners CANAME in Mexico and EFC in Canada to ensure that we have these common interfaces and we're able to trade seamlessly and use our products across all 3 countries.
Okay, so how can this relationship, how this Mexican role can evolve?
That's a great question. I think this review is an opportunity really for all countries to think about the relationship and step back and figure out what's working and how it can be improved. There are a number of suggestions from industry, in the specific example of Mexico, for example, about how some trade practices can be improved or upgraded in a way that both supports North American trade, but also supports the Mexican economy. I'll give you an example. Mexico's electrical code actually hasn't been updated since 2012.
Okay.
There's another example, right, of how updating our electrical code both supports integration, right? You can now seamlessly use products that are developed in other markets in Mexico, but also helps Mexico's economy, right? It's a win-win situation. Another example is the regulations to support Mexico's quality infrastructure law and ensure that Mexico is able to incorporate the latest standards developed across North America in the Mexican economy and in Mexican NOMs. So that's another example of a common sense way that Mexico can improve some of its regulations in a way that both supports U.S. access to the Mexican economy, but also supports Mexican jobs and supports employment in Mexico.
Can you tell us, be more specific about this upgrading the code? I mean, which benefits could bring that?
Yeah, sure. So the electrical code is something that is updated regularly across all three economies. And in U.S. and Canada, it's been updated every 3 years. Mexico hasn't updated its code, NOM 001, since 2012. And so as a result, you start introducing concerns about interoperability, right? Maybe my equipment doesn't work as well if the code is very out of date. Maybe I even introduce safety concerns, right? Because products haven't been designed with this very old electrical code in mind.
Okay.
And so it's an opportunity to update that code and more broadly to update other commercial practices that might be of concern in a way that supports all three economies.
Okay.
Patrick, I have so many questions, but first a comment. Most of your companies, of the companies participating in NEMA, are invested in Mexico, in Canada, and obviously they're investing a lot in the U.S., right?
Yes.
T-Connectivity, Emerson, Schneider, Siemens. You have Cygnus also as a part of NEMA. That's a Mexican, very big company. But let me ask you something about Washington in particular. How to navigate Washington nowadays through an association like NEMA to represent these, hundreds of companies with probably different interests, but at the end, one goal. That is the revision and to lower the tariffs and to create we always talk about integration, but I think we need to start talking about co-production, right? You express how your companies produce some goods in the US, some goods in Canada, some goods in Mexico, and then interact between each other. So how to navigate Washington right now?
Yeah, it's a great question because, as you noted, it's more important than ever to be engaging on trade policy in Washington. There's so much unpredictability.
Yeah.
And so understanding how to engage here and who to engage with is essential. And that's where I think trade associations can play a role, right? Not every company has the resources or has the full ability to touch the executive branch, the Congress, and the judiciary. And associations are a way that companies can share best practices and understand what the evolving climate is like as it relates to trade and tariffs in particular. So I think associations are an important resource like NEMA, but also other associations that support trilateral trade across the three economies. One thing that I think is difficult is that the playbook for engaging in Washington is different nowadays as compared to previous administrations. I would say previous administrations maybe took a more consultative approach, particularly with Congress, consulting with Congress, for example, as they seek to change trade deals or modify tariff rates. This administration is taking a little bit more of a leadership role. And even within the administration, it's a smaller group of people who are making the decision instead of having a more coherent interagency process. So it's important to be engaged here and to leverage associations and other resources to understand and have a voice in the changing political paradigm.
Tell just one more question. Tell me the three main factors that small group of people in the White House are, base their decision. I think let me see if you agree with this. National security, China, AI. Are those three, or you can add more factors to that decision?
Yeah, those are three really important: national security, China, AI. National security and China, I would argue, very interrelated, right? There is a real concern about the role China plays in our economy through transshipment and dumping and other commercial practices that fundamentally have weakened North American integration. I think it's important that all three of our countries address that in the ongoing review. I would add another, one of which is to say exports and jobs, right? They want to do more manufacturing in the United States. because we've seen our manufacturing workforce and our manufacturing capability lose some of its strength over the years. So opportunities to do that in a constructive way with our partners, that's something that NEMA supports. We want to do more here, and we want to do more in North America.
So talking about China, and also what you talked about related to co-production between Mexico, US, and Canada, we know that reliance on Chinese inputs has dropped by over 30% since 2018. How central is Mexico to that shift, and how is adapting to increasingly complex rules of origin, for example?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I actually have some updated figures from our business intelligence team. It's now 49.5%, so almost 50% of China's market share in the electrical industry. Mexico is essential to, I think, powering this trend and to more North American and friendshoring, because fundamentally, no single economy can do everything on its own. And so being able to leverage the manufacturing workforce in Mexico, key inputs, critical minerals, that is all essential to be able to do more in the US and to diversify away from Chinese products and Chinese manufacturing. So that's essential.
How is Mexico adapting to these complex rules of origin?
Yeah, so it's no secret that the US side is potentially interested in reviewing the rules of origin in the agreement. This was something that was consistent with the previous negotiation of the agreement, where they introduced specific rules of origin for the auto sector. I think this discussion around rules of origin, it's fundamentally going to be a long-term discussion. It's really complex, really complicated to make these sort of changes in rules of origin. So I think this is going to be a discussion that we continue to have for at least the next year.
Okay.
Patrick, we're talking a lot about AI, right, in this town and everywhere. And when we think about AI, we think on software and ideas and ChatGPT and the cloud and other stuff. But in order to improve AI, you need tools, right? And you are at the center of that, right? Enabling data centers, enabling obviously the energy that goes and flows through all these systems, the supercomputers, the quantum computers, in everything you are behind. I mean, NEMA and the partners are behind that. In order to move forward with AI, what should we do in your ecosystem?
Yeah, the electrical industry is fundamental to the success of AI. So if you look at a new data center, about 1/3 of the investment that goes into that data center comes from the electrical industry. So it's really essential that we have policies that enable and support our industry as we see this huge new demand driver. For one, there's going to be changes in the technology needed. If you think about what a data center needs, it's different than a residential building, right? There's fewer people, maybe less lighting, maybe a lot more high intensity power demand. Maybe there's a need for DC power as opposed to AC power in certain portions of a data center. There's definitely a need for a lot of cooling because there's a lot of heat given off by AI data centers. So there's going to be a lot of technology change. We need to facilitate and encourage that. We also need to, and this comes back to the trade picture, right? Be able to lower costs for companies who are investing in North America. And so that's going to mean at the end of the day, lowering tariffs for critical products used in AI and grid infrastructure. And that's going to both facilitate AI growth, but it's also going to lower electricity prices for consumers. Yeah. And those are folks who are definitely making their voice heard in this discussion around data centers.
Well, to wrap up, Patrick, we know that electricity demand may increase 50% by 2050. So is the region ready to attend that demand? And what about Mexico? Can we make a double click in the region?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, our industry is doing our best to make sure that we're ready for this massive increase in demand. It's a challenge, certainly, for all three of our countries, but it's also a huge opportunity for us to enable new technologies like electric vehicles, like AI, like quantum computing, and our manufacturers are getting ready to meet that challenge. What we need is a stable trade paradigm to do that, right? We need a stable trade agreement around the USMCA. And we need lower duties in order to support growth in our sector, particularly as it relates to key AI and grid products. If we can do that, I'm confident that our industry and our countries can support the increased grid demand that we're going to see over the next years.
Great. Well, thank you so much for being with us, Patrick Lozada.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Patrick.